Hi, my name's Cheese, and welcome to another Bonesweeper Progress Update video. If you haven't heard of Bonesweeper before, you can find an overview in this other video, but the TLDR is, it's Minesweeper, but fossils, and you get to build skeletons out of the stuff you dig up. Getting Misc Fossil gameplay up and running has been my priority over the past month or so, but I've also found time to give the map phase some refinement and make a start on some core functionality for the museum phase. Up until recently, every tile that wasn't empty had a fossil for the current skeleton in it. In order for Bonesweeper's meta progression to feel right, getting all the bones needed to build a skeleton should feel like an accomplishment that takes some time, and Misc Fossils help make the skeleton bones more scarce in a way that allows that to happen. To make it easier to experiment and tune, I've added a setting for controlling the ratio. Right now, 60% of tiles containing Misc Fossils feels a lot better, but I suspect I'm going to eventually make it so that half the Misc Fossils found don't contain anything, in order to make sure that it still feels special when you find an insect in some amber or a trilobite in some rock. A feature from the prototype that I hadn't given priority to until now was a pair of settings that make the game decrement dig adjacency numbers when fossils are excavated or smashed. The player who originally requested these features said that they ended up making the game feel more confusing, but a text-to-speech using tester recently expressed a desire for them. It got me thinking about how sighted players likely use the layout of numbers as a visual cue, even if that's a bit subconscious. I gave dig site generation a little optimization by removing some old code that was generating new meshes at startup for each tile, a holdover from when I was moving the actual vertices for tile variation rather than doing it in a shader. While I was poking around, I added a setting to disable the tile variation shader, which I think will help the game run on even lower end hardware than it already does. Peter has continued work on exploring music concepts for the dig phase, and after some iteration and refinement, I think we found something that has the right qualities. We've been progressing towards more sparse music that can sit in the background without demanding a lot of attention, but still sets a thoughtful tone and mood that suggests some wonder and mystery. This is a bit of a milestone, and I'm really excited. With all the recent dig phase work, my progress tracker has moved into feature complete for some aspects of dig gameplay. There's still plenty of visual, audio, and interface work left to do, but it's nice to know that the foundation on which all of those rest is closing in on being done. After implementing Misc Fossils for the dig phase, I continued to work on the Misc Fossil sorting mechanics for the assembly phase. Misc Fossils are sprinkled throughout the fossil chunk queue, and give players something else to keep track of while assembling skeletons. It's pretty shallow gameplay, but I don't feel like an involved distraction is really necessary here. Each Misc Fossil has a surround that encloses it. Right now that's only amber, but eventually there'll be rock too, and the idea is that at the end of assembly, what's inside will be revealed, and the opaque dig mesh will be replaced with something that allows the specimen within to be seen. And that's what players will end up putting in their museums. With all this work done, the majority of the assembly phase gameplay is in that feature complete category, and some of the UI functionality is where I want it to be as well. I spent some time feeling uncertain over the past month or two about whether or not I was making as much progress as I had projected, but seeing this makes me feel like I'm not quite as far behind an ideal timeline as I had expected. Dig sites in the map phase now only show species that share the specific geological epoch for a given site. This means that early Cretaceous formations will only show species that occurred during the early Cretaceous as possible things to discover at that site. This spreads the content currently in the game out by quite a lot, making it feel pretty empty right now, but that'll shift back as I add more skeletons and Misc Fossils. The spaces in the map phase background that I mentioned in the last video now get filled with books, potted plants, and skulls, all cycling in to help make the background feel less static across days, weeks, months, maybe even years of playtime. When selecting a dig site to visit, the camera now orbits into place more slowly, and zooms in as a red line traces an implied route to the destination. When returning to the map from a dig site, the camera starts in close and pulls out to a comfortable distance. I have some ideas for expanding this a little further, but together, I think what's here now helps convey an extra sense of travel and transition in a fun way. As with assembly and dig phases, recent work here has pushed map phase gameplay into feature complete for some aspects, and that's a great feeling to have. Continuing the Misc Fossil gameplay flow through to its conclusion, I worked on implementing them in the museum phase as well, making a range of poses for the placeholder ant model, and implementing all the bits and pieces for instantiating them and making them look more or less right. I also finally started work on placement mechanics, and put together a rough UI for picking specific specimens out of the player's inventory. which allows for filtering by species as well as searching by typing. Eventually I want to allow players to name a specimen or skeleton once they're finished in the assembly phase, but for now everything's just the species name followed by a number. Once a skeleton's selected, it'll float in front of the player until it's put down or placed back into the inventory. Skeletons that have already been placed can be picked up and repositioned. I still have to validate placement and finish some snapping behaviours, but this feels like it starts to communicate how museum customization is going to work, and that's a cool milestone to be in the cusp of. A very big thank you to the Patreon supporters going by on screen at the moment. Their support has helped me eat while making this game, and I am so very appreciative. A huge thanks also to Screen Tasmania, who supported this project with a small grant at the end of last year. Anyway, that's about it for today. If you'd like to keep track of development or try the playable prototype, you can find links in the description. And if you're super keen to try out what we've talked about here today, I make early test builds available to my Patreon supporters. Thanks for watching, and goodbye!